The Fey Wanderer is a ranger subclass meant to represent all the rangers who didn't read the "Don't Touch the Fey" sign. Now, this ranger has been imbued with Fey-like abilities. This subclass is jam-packed with powerful abilities that you can use in pretty much any campaign. I think this subclass speaks for itself, but still, let me tell you why you should absolutely play a Fey Wanderer. This video is based on my personal experiences. I will not be going over basic subclass information. Y'all can probably read. I've played or DM'd for all the ranger subclasses. My opinions probably do not align with the D&D community at large. I'm going to be giving my rankings for each subclass based on 5 criteria: role-playing potential, combat, spells, utility, and X factor. Each ranger subclass feature can gain 20 points in each category. However, the later in level a class feature is gotten, the more heavily it will be scrutinized. Since most parties never reach 10th level, abilities that come online after 10th level won't be given as much weight. Alright, let's get to the video. Firstly, this is a subclass for the role players out there. Those of you that love getting into character and having a subclass that backs you up. Through its spells and subclass features, the Fey Wanderer gives a lot of mechanical support for charisma checks. Its 3rd level feature, Otherworldly Glamour, is surprisingly effective. This low level option can easily make it so that you're rolling at +4 or even +5 on most of your charisma checks. This is a subtle, low level feature that is going to be useful for the entirety of your campaign. Additionally though, the Fey Wanderer has access to some fantastic spells. Each one of the spells that this subclass gives the Fey Wanderer feels intentional and very well thought out. As an example, the spell Charmed Person is a great spell normally. However, when you combine it with the 7th level feature Beguiling Twist, well, you're getting around one of the biggest weaknesses for half-casters. You see, usually, because you have to spread out your ability score improvements across multiple different ability scores, your spell save isn't going to be competitive with dedicated casters. However, with Beguiling Twist, you get 2 shots for the price of 1 at getting a charm off on a creature, but you have an arsenal of other spells that work so well with this subclass. Misty Step is one of the best bonus action spells in the game, and because the Fey Wanderer often has its bonus action free, its inclusion in this spell list feels so much more impactful. Additionally, you're getting Dispel Magic, which is freakishly good on the Fey Wanderer. And of course, if you go into the higher levels, you can pick up spells like Dimension Door and Mislead, which are both fantastic utility spells. This is not to mention that you're also going to get a bonus Summon Fey spell at 11th level and an improved Misty Step at 15th. This spell list isn't just good inside of combat, but more so outside of combat. So if you're looking to build a spell-casting ranger, I would start looking at the Fey Wanderer. But let's turn to another outside of combat feature, which is one of my personal favorites in all of 5th edition at this point, Feywild Gifts. This is technically a part of the Fey Wanderer's spellcasting. Essentially, what Feywild Gifts is going to give you is a small ribbon effect that is going to give a non-mechanically beneficial bonus to your character. Some players and dungeon masters don't even acknowledge this feature because it doesn't do anything mechanically for the character, but I think it adds a lot. The gift you select or randomly roll can do a lot to inform how others perceive your character in game, and can help differentiate them from other player characters and make you truly feel like a Fey Wanderer. So here are 2 quick tips for getting the most out of this feature, and the first is, don't be afraid to come up with a custom feature with your dungeon master. I would advise against it having any level of mechanical significance, but it can really help make your Fey Wanderer feel like your own. And the second tip is, dungeon masters out there, don't be afraid to make this Feywild gift have story significance. Get the gears going in your head and think about how this gift can somehow help on a narrative level this player character while you're playing your campaign. Maybe those illusory butterflies keep the party safe during long rests near where the Fey Wanderer got their powers. Or perhaps those flowers that are sprouting from the hair of the Fey Wanderer every single dawn are used as entryway into a particular dungeon linked to their backstory. I've always gotten a lot as a DM out of taking the Feywild gift seriously when I'm constructing my campaign, so don't take this feature for granted. Finally, we should also talk about the Dreadful Strikes feature that comes with this subclass. This is essentially a Hunter's Mark replacement gifting you infinite, free action psychic damage. While it's only a once per turn effect, Dreadful Strikes is a lot better than you might think it to be. Psychic damage is rarely resisted in 5th edition, and additionally this opens up your bonus action instead of having to use it on something like Favored Foe or Hunter's Mark. Spells like Ensnaring Strike, Healing Spirit, and Ashardalon's Stride become even more important because you already have your extra damage covered. Alternatively though, Dreadful Strikes can allow you to do even more damage by doubling up on your bonus action damage like Favored Foe, Zephyr Strike, or I suppose Hunter's Mark, but in modern D&D 5th edition, I would probably steer you away from that particular spell. There is so much to love about this subclass, so let's start talking about the concepts behind it. How can you get the most out of role-playing a Fey Wanderer? Well, you have to keep in mind that you are the Fey Ranger. There is a mystique to this character because the Feywild is a place of unrestrained, awe-inspiring natural beauty, but it's also filled with this chaotic and primordial magic. Both of these concepts show up heavily in the mechanics of the subclass. The beauty of the Feywild is represented with your otherworldly glamour, and the chaos in your Fey gift, your dreadful strikes, and your beguiling twist. So one of the things to think about when you're playing this subclass is how you will balance each aspect of this character. Will you even try and balance the beauty and the chaos, swaying more towards unnatural beauty or the chaotic parts of this subclass, or will you try and mold both of these things together? There are a lot of plot hooks that open up by just focusing on where this subclass comes from, because this is also the Sorcerer Ranger. The subclass mentions how you got these powers from somewhere. You touched the Fey in some way and they left their mark on you. So another question you can begin trying to answer is, how did you get these Fey powers? What happened to you? Think about your initiating event. The subclass gives examples like your powers coming from a shining fruit that you ate from a tree, a magic spring that you swam in, or some other auspicious event. I quite like thinking about this subclass in terms of your character making a warlock pact without knowing the terms of the deal. It's like the Feywild or one of its denizens is your patron by default because they gifted some of their powers to you. So think about how that gift was bestowed. Did you even know it was happening? Did you even want the gift? I think this subclass really allows you to tap into any part of the Feywild that you want. Or maybe reflavor this subclass and think about the powers coming from a place other than the Fey. I once had a player run a Fey Wanderer who didn't get their powers from the Fey, but got the powers from a devil from the Nine Hells. So don't be afraid to go outside the Feywild and see if there's another place that your character could have touched and got powers from. However, let's start talking about multiclassing. I think for the first 8 levels, the Fey Wanderer really doesn't want to multiclass. All your powers and abilities are pretty solid. After 8th level though, the Ranger class and this subclass in particular really starts to peter out. So don't be afraid to look for other classes to supplement your character. For instance, I think a class like the Monk fits really well with what the Fey Wanderer is trying to do. The extra 1d4 from Dreadful Strikes helps to make the Monk's damage more competitive. Plus, this subclass gives a lot of much needed utility to the Monk. However, I also very easily think that you can dip into Fighter for this subclass. Pairing a fighter subclass like the Rune Knight with the Fey Wanderer provides a very strong combo. Combining the utility of the Fey Wanderer with the utility of the Rune Knight can make some awe-inspiring combinations. For instance, the Cloud Rune of the Rune Knight can give you advantage on all deception checks, which, if you're a Fey Wanderer, is really good. Another great option though is to dip into the Samurai Fighter at higher levels. This fighter subclass synergizes well with having a high wisdom ability score. Plus you're going to get a significant boost to the Ranger's combat prowess. Finally, if you're wanting to add more spell casting to your Fey Wanderer, consider going with the Cleric class, particularly the Order domain. All the features you get with this subclass synergize incredibly well with the Fey Wanderer. The Channel Divinity, Order's Demand, is just an AoE to try and charm creatures around you. This means at those higher levels you're going to be getting more opportunities to use your Beguiling Twist. Although I do find it rather strange thinking about how the Fey Ranger and the Order Cleric work so well together. I think it would be a delightful character to play, a worshipper of the god of Order who just so happened to get tainted with the chaotic energy of the Feywild. However, I spent this entire video hyping up the Fey Wanderer, but what are its weaknesses? Well, it doesn't have many. I think the biggest one is that this subclass is stretched incredibly thin. Or rather, it's not exemplary at any one thing, it's trying to balance a lot of different playstyles. But yet, at the same time, I think it's well balanced. It's not overpowered in any one particular category. I would say this isn't so much of a weakness as me just saying there's nothing really for you to break in this subclass if you're a min-maxer. Additionally, you will find that combat is secondary to this subclass. You might feel a bit underpowered compared to other ranger subclasses if your group is primarily concerned with combat. Dreadful Strikes is about the only direct combat bonus that you're going to get. Beguiling Twist, Fey Reinforcements, and Misty Wanderer are all situationally useful, but also not directly combat oriented. You don't have the raw power in combat like a Gloomstalker or a Horizon Walker. I've also mentioned this earlier on in the video, but this subclass is weaker at later levels. Fey Reinforcements, for instance, is good, but I wouldn't say it's worthy of an 11th level ability. This is partially because normally, as a ranger, you pick up Summoned Fey at 9th level, a whole 2 levels earlier than when you get this subclass feature. So it's not like you're actually getting something new. And furthermore, when Fey Reinforcements is cast without a spell slot, it only lasts for a minute. You're spending an entire action to summon frankly an underwhelming Fey stat block in a lot of instances. That's not great. Most of the time, I'm just going to want to attack instead of wasting my action. Most Fey Wanderers that I've seen never use this feature in later levels, or rather, they just cast Summon Fey normally because it's better. Misty Wanderer is also underwhelming for a 15th level subclass capstone. Most of the time, it simply reads, gain 2 or 3 free casts of Misty Step per long rest. Few rangers, even if you're a Fey Wanderer, have a wisdom greater than +2 or +3 at this level. Maybe Misty Wanderer is a good feature at 7th level, but not at 15th. Honestly, it feels like the designers kinda gave up after Beguiling Twist at 7th level. They realized that the subclass was good enough and nobody was going to use those later level abilities anyway, which honestly, fair enough. If you gave me a subclass with 4 fantastic features, and I'm going to use these features for the entirety of the campaign, and then told me that the later level features, which I'm probably never going to get to, are mid, well, I can't fault you too much. But I will fault you a little, so let's go over and get to the ratings. As usual, we have 5 categories: roleplay, combat, spells, utility, and X Factor. X Factor is what makes your subclass different from the rest, that extra little bit of spice. Starting off with the roleplay category, I'm giving the Fey Wanderer a 17 out of 20. This subclass comes in with an incredibly thought out character archetype. It feels very easy for players to slip into the role of a Fey Ranger. I'm not giving this subclass full points though, because in some campaigns, narratively, you're not going to be getting a lot out of being a Fey Ranger. If we're never interacting with the Feywild in a campaign, then I feel a little bit let down as a player. On the other hand though, in the right campaign, you'll be interacting with the Fey a lot, and you'll be able to get so much role-playing potential out of this character. I know I would have loved the designers to make this the Realm Wanderer so that you would have had options depending on which particular plane you were touched by, whether it be the Feywild, the Shadowfell, the Nine Hells, the Abyss, or what have you. Of course though, they want to sell new books, so I get it. 17 out of 20, moving on. As we go to combat, I'm giving this subclass a 13 out of 20. Dreadful Strikes is probably the only feature you're going to be consistently using every combat. Everything else is either situational or reserved for the later levels, where they still might be situational. As for the spells this subclass gets, I'm giving it an 18 out of 20. This is one of the best spell arsenals out there for Ranger players. Not only are these spells thematic, but they are powerful. And part of their power is that this subclass supports the spells that it's giving to the player. I know it seems like such a simple idea to make it so that the features that the subclass has directly empower the spells that the Ranger subclass is giving, but for a majority of these subclasses, that's not the case. Part of the reason why these spells are so good is because they perfectly synergize with the subclass. So the Fey Wanderer is getting a solid 18 out of 20. As for utility, I'm giving this subclass a 16 out of 20. The Fey Wanderer has the capacity to be the face of your D&D party. In roleplay heavy campaigns where negotiation and deception are important, the Fey Wanderer shines. But you're also getting utility in the form of incredible movement spells. Without a doubt, at the higher levels, the Fey Wanderer is one of the most mobile rangers out there. But I will say that the Fey Wanderer doesn't offer anything unique in any of these categories. Its utility abilities can be found elsewhere, so I'm not going to put it any higher than a 16 out of 20. As for the X Factor, I'm giving this subclass a 16 out of 20. A charisma/charm based ranger is interesting. In roleplay heavy campaigns, this subclass in particular is going to shine. However, on the flip side, if you're in a dungeon crawling campaign, you won't get the same bang for your buck. Plus, I would have liked to see a bit more chaos and randomness to really play up the Fey aesthetic. And finally, we have to bring up about this X factor that at higher levels, a lot of monsters are immune to the charmed condition. It might sound weird to players who have never really played mini campaigns past 11th level, but trust me, a lot of these higher CR monsters just cannot be charmed. So there are foundational problems with this subclass's X factor at those higher levels. But still, in the lower levels of D&D, levels 1 to 8, the Fey Wanderer is going to shine. Especially in a campaign where talking to NPCs and other player characters is a large part of your sessions. So for that reason, the Fey Wanderer is coming in with a final total of 80 out of 100. It is a great Ranger subclass that is an absolute joy to play. It's a very unique playing Ranger subclass. You really feel like you've made an impactful decision on your session-to-session gameplay when you've picked up the Fey Wanderer. Not only in combat, not only during role-playing, but in all aspects of the campaign. But maybe the Fey Wanderer isn't for you, and if that's the case, go ahead and check out this video right here. This fighter subclass is built for the kill. And thank you for entering the dungeon.